Hello and welcome back to this video series on static and dynamic data structures. In this video, I would like to code out a program that utilizes an array list that stores the objects we'll create when running our program. In the previous video, we took a look at the different types of collections, or most commonly used collections in Java. So we looked at the array list, the hash set, the hash map, and we looked at how we observed how these collections can store values that can be restricted to a particular data type, such as string, int, and double. But let's create our own class and look at how we can enforce that only our user-defined objects can store and be stored in an array list. So I've created a program in online Java GDB, and I'll share the link at the end of this video for those who want to take a look at it and play around with the code. But here we have two arrays, and these two arrays is going to hold the data. And we're going to use this data that's stored in these two multidimensional arrays to create our objects. And then once we create our objects, we're going to immediately, once we create an object, we're going to add it to the list. So we're going to be doing multiple things in the midst of our code. We're going to first use a looping structure to loop through the multidimensional array. And then in the midst of doing that, we'll be creating an object instance. And then the next statement would actually add that object instance to our array list. And so here's a few comments that I've added to do that. But let's first take a look at our candy class, process that class, and then we'll jump into the coding of our program that will create these object instances and add them to the list. All right, so in online GDB, I created a file called candy.java. And how I did that, I just clicked on this button here while my mouse is hovering, said new file, and I said candy, and I gave it the extension .java. And so here's my class structure. It's a public class candy, have two properties, name, price. I do have get methods, get name and get price, but then I have a constructor here that's defining two parameters, name and price. And so I'm going to use this constructor to pass in data as we're looping through in our main method to set the name and price for that object instance. And then I have a toString method that's just a string representation for this candy class. So let's jump back to our main method. And the first thing I want to do is declare our array list. If you remember, we need some import statements. We need to actually bring in the resources to this file. And so we're going to do an import statement, and it's going to be java.util.arraylist. And then here we're going to declare our array list and instantiate it. We're going to give it a name. But before we give it a variable name, we're going to enforce that only candy objects can be held within this list. And we'll say candy list equals new array list. And then here's where we've declared and instantiated our new array list. And so now you'll see here I need two looping structures. And the reason why we need two looping structures is because we want to iterate through this multidimensional array. Our outer loop is going to iterate through the columns. And then our inner loop is going to iterate through the various rows that we have within our multidimensional array. In a single dimensional array, we only need one looping structure. But in a multidimensional array, we're going to need two. So I'm going to code out the for loops. So I'll say for var I is equal to 0, I is less than, let's say, 3. And we could say the length and use the length property, but let's just keep it simple because there's three different, we know the size of our array, the number of columns and rows. We'll just say 3. We're going to say I++. So that's our outer loop. That's going to loop through the columns. And then we're going to have our inner loop that's going to loop through the various rows. We're going to say var x is equal to 0. X is less than 3, x++. Now let's work on our program incrementally. So what we're going to do is just test to make sure that we actually are outputting the various items in our array. So let's take the item multidimensional array and just output it to the console. So we'll say system, print line, we'll say item, and then we're going to give the subscripts here. The first one is going to be the column So let's say I, and then the second subscript for our multidimensional array is going to be the row, which is going to be X. And all we want to do here is just print out the items to make sure that we're accurately matriculating through the array and capturing all the values stored in that array. So let's run this program. And if everything works correctly, we should get Snickers, Twix, Mars, Skittles, Starburst, all the way down to Trident. So if we look at our terminal, that's what we got. So great. So at this point, we know that our for loop is working, or two for loops are working. We could just go ahead and create those object instances. So watch what I'm going to do here. I'm going to actually declare a candy object. So I'll say candy, and I'll give it a variable name. A candy equals new. Let's do this here. Let's just declare it in. Let's just declare our candy object. And then within my for loop here, this is where I'm going to actually instantiate or create a new instance of a candy object. So I'll say a candy equals new candy, and I'm going to call on the constructor. The first thing I'm going to pass in, I have to pass it in the order that I've defined it within my constructor, which is going to be the name, and then the price, which is identified as the parameters state here on line 9. And so here I'll say new candy, and then I'll pass in item. It'll be I and X, comma, and then it'll be the price. I and X. And all this is doing here is just creating one instance of a candy object. And so it's not creating all of them. So as it's looping through, it's going to create an instance for each of the various items along with its price. And then while it's in the midst of actually creating instantiating a candy object, we're going to actually add it to our array list. And the way to do that is we're going to target the name of the array list, the variable, which is candy list. And we're going to say dot, and there's an add method, and then we're going to add a candy. And so that's what our functions are doing. We're iterating through the multi-dimensional array. And then here we're creating a candy object by calling the constructor. And then we add that candy to the candy list, right? So let's save this. Let's run it and see what we get. So we'll test out our program. And then what we're going to do next is we're going to check and see if it's actually added to our array list, right? So yes, we didn't get anything at this point because we didn't print out anything. But let's go ahead and actually output the items to the terminal. So let's use a for loop to iterate through. So we'll just say var, let's just say I is equal to 0, I is less than, we say, and this time here, our candy list dot size, and that's the method we have to use with the array list. And if you have any questions about what methods are available through the array list, then you have to look at the documentation. You can observe some of the different properties and methods you can use. And then we'll say I plus plus. And then here, we're just going to simply output. And so we'll just do a system dot and then here we're going to say candy list dot get, and then here we'll just put I for getting the respective items from our list. So let's run this and see what we get. right? So in this case here, we call the toString method, and you'll see that we get the name of the candy is Snickers, the price of the candy is $3.50, the name of the candy is Twix, the price of this candy is $3.90. And so let's say that we wanted to tug out just the actual name of the candy. What we could do is we can say get I dot. In this case, we have to say get. We have defined a get method for our name, and we could just get specifically the name. So now if we run this, we should be able to just get the name for each of our items that we've created. So we get Snickers, Twix, Mars, Skittles, Starburst. And if we want to get the price, we just say get price. And we're calling these methods here from our class that we just defined. So the get name and then the get price. And we have to use these methods because we're enforcing data encapsulation because we set these to private. So back in our main here, this will get the price. And if we wanted to, we could say get the price. So we get the name and the price as we iterate through here. All right. So that's a simple program that captures how we can store objects within our array list. We would define our class. In this case, I'm using a constructor to set each object instance. We could use the set methods. And then also, we're adding those object instances to a list. And the statement that's specifically doing that is here on line 34. And then on lines 40 through 42, we're just simply outputting what's stored in the array list. Sometimes you'll see folks do something such as this. So what they'll do is instead of actually having two statements, they'll just take this statement here and add it as a parameter to the add method. And so it's a shorten the code a little bit here where you can just create the new instance and add it all in one statement. And so this would run as well. So if I run this program, it's just a condensed way of actually doing two things at once. Let's take this off. There we go. That's right. And also in this program, we just did an example of how we actually tug at the toString method by just simply getting rid of all of this, and that would actually print out the string representation of our program. Okay, I am going to wrap up this video, but hopefully that gives you an idea of how to work with objects, how to add them to the list. And then typically what you would do is you would just work with that list, and you can change and modify things from that list as you work through, as you matriculate through your code on the runtime of your program. All right, have a good one. Well, a few more things here before I actually end this video. Let me actually save this. I'll share this link. One of the things I mentioned at the beginning of the video. So here's the link that if you wanted to take a look at this, you can pause the video and copy this link. And that's 5WGAZ1ROI. And then the other thing, I also want to make a small correction. I think in the video I mentioned that the first outer loop iterates through the columns. It actually iterates through the rows. And then the inner loop iterates through the columns. So slight correction there. Outer loop is to control the iteration of the rows. Inner loop actually iterates through all the columns for that row. All right, take care.